program of Canberra. I know some of you come from outside of Canberra. So Canberra has a public school instrumental music program. We're very fortunate here. And we have more than 50 schools participating in our primary and high schools. And then often they continue in their music learning into their high school year. So this is our third ensemble, which is year 7 to 12 students who audition, and we also have a year 7 and 8 junior concert band, a senior concert band, a jazz band. We were the most portable of the options for the conference, so we're very thrilled to be able to play here today. We're going to play a few more pieces, so a fun popcorn number which has some improvisation with Joel playing for us as our jazz focus of the team, and followed by some Mozart, and followed by the most famous flute piece of all, Margaret. So popcorn please.
Thank you to the teachers and students from the ACT Flute Ensemble. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for making the effort to be here, because you are the reason why many of us are here, actually. So thank you, students. And thank you to the teachers, parents, mums and dads and carers who came and brought the students here as well. So thank you to you. I'd now like to invite Professor Annette Woods to come up and introduce our Radford speaker for this afternoon.
Well, that's a pretty pleasant way to remember why we should be here: young people, children, and a well-funded public education system. Look, it's my pleasure to introduce the 2017 Radford Lecture. The Radford Lecture is delivered each year by a distinguished educator or researcher in an area relevant to education research. I'm moving straight into this because I know that Margaret wants to get started, so and I'm the one standing between her and getting started. So it's been a tradition of the association since 1978 to bestow the award of the Radford Lecture each year at the annual conference. The award is a mark of esteem in the education research community and celebrates the significant contribution of the awardee within their field over time. The Radford Lecture takes the name of William or Bill Radford. Bill Radford had a long and esteemed career in education. He followed his father into teaching when he stayed on after graduation at Horsham High School as a junior teacher. And in 1932, at 19, he entered the Melbourne Teachers College and later University of Melbourne to do honours. In the 1930s and early 1940, he taught at Barnsdale High School, worked at ACER and worked in the curriculum and research branch of the Victorian Education Department. As part of his ACER work, he co-edited the Review of Education in Australia. In 1946, he was appointed the Assistant Director of ACER and eventually in 1955, Director of ACER. And he continued to edit the Review of Education in Australia for many years. And in one edition, and I quite liked this when I was researching and found it, in 1964, he noted that Australian education is making steady or even spectacular progress. He was president of the Australian College of Education in 69 and 71. In 69, he was appointed in Queensland, and Martin made reference to this last year, by the state government to chair the report Public Examination of Queensland Secondary Schools, which led eventually to the abolition of external exams. Now, that was a legacy that stayed until 2017, when we've seen the reintroduction of external exams in Year 12 in Queensland and the marginalisation of a long history of school-based moderated assessment in Queensland. Bill Radford was a foundation member of AARE in 1970, president in 1974, and in 1977 it was decided as a memorial to Bill Radford to designate one of the plenaries at each annual conference to his name and to establish the Radford Lecture. The Radford Lecture in 2017 will be presented by Professor Margaret Somervillehd. Deserves a clap. Now, Margaret is a Professor of Education at Western Sydney University, where until very recently she was the Director of the Centre of Educational Research. I have the absolute joy of working with Margaret on an ARC-funded project which involves collaboration with young children, very young children, and foregrounds their capacities to engage insightfully in conceptualising sustainability and literacy as they name their worlds. Now, you can read the full bio or Margaret's full bio in the program, but I wanted to just direct your attention to how Margaret names herself in the second sentence of her bio when she says, "She has led a rich and varied life as a mother of 4 children, including time on remote Aboriginal communities and in rural Australia as a self-sufficient farmer and as a professor at 3 universities. I think that's probably the best version of a definition of balance that I've read for a little while. Margaret brings this rich and varied life experience to her academic work. She is kind and caring as a research collaborator and insightful as an academic thinker. So it is with absolute delight that I introduce you to Professor Margaret Somervillehd to present the 2017 Radford Lecture entitled Education Research for the Anthropocene, the Micropolitics of Researchers Becoming.
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. There's a couple of things I want to say before I begin. There are some very special Aboriginal people here in the audience, and that's really important to me that they are here. The other thing is that you are welcome to take photos of any of the slides except those that involve real people. Okay, and I'm quite happy to answer any email questions or comments that you might want to make about the talk afterwards. Okay, so I want to thank the executive of AARE and the organisers of the conference for inviting me to give the Radford Lecture and to acknowledge the Darug and Dharawal peoples as the caretakers of the land where I live and work. And I want to do that with the words that Dharawal elder Auntie Fran gave me. So, Daji Balangoniya, Juwali Birong Gamadal Gurang, Darami Ngawe, Buljang Bidigal Dura Ngang, Nini Bulima Nandirita, Nini Dingan Durawan Bata, Nini Gadalung Gambi Miwuna, Nini Ngungwaga Gambata Gana, Nini Ngara Chanaba Karung Gurung, Titiri Kura Onya. And the translation is, we acknowledge the guardians of the spirit of this land and give our respects to the elders past and present. May you always see the beauty of the earth. May you always taste the sweetest fruit. May you always feel the warmth of the flame. May you always smell the perfume of the flowers. May you always hear the laughter of the children. We thank you. Okay, so with these two possum skin cloaks, I want to extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal peoples of Australia as the First Nations people, caring for this country for hundreds of thousands of years. Both cloaks were made by Yorta Yorta artist Trina Ham and tell the creation story of Dungala, the sacred Murray River. The cloaks represent the continuity of caring for country into the contemporary present, and each time they are worn and their story is told, country is sung into being in the cyclical time of creation. The first cloak was worn by Ngunnawal elder Auntie Matilda House when Kevin Rudd apologised on behalf of the nation for the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants, and for their families left behind. I am sorry. The second cloak was created to save the life of my baby granddaughter when she was at risk of dying soon after her birth. It superimposes the story of Dungala's creation with Luna's birth and the ancestor birds who came to protect her. The two together represent the large and the small, the politics of a nation and the micropolitics of the intimately personal, which I want to weave together in this address. I invite you to think with me about how education research can address the big questions of our time in the context of politics understood as both intimate and immense, as the intertwined politics of global conditions and of the nation with the intimately personal. I will do this through tracing the moments and movements of researcher becoming within the micropolitics of a lifetime of educational research. It is about the researcher lives we all live. My history with Aboriginal people began a long time before I ever dreamed of becoming a researcher, when I went to live in the desert 240 miles southwest of Alice Springs as a very young mother. I had access to a four-wheel drive vehicle and was not working, so these old Pintabee women would ask me to drive them to country for ceremony. For them, all women of childbearing age knew ceremony. I learnt through the touch of gentle hands, making designs on my white skin in earthy red, yellow and white ochres, from the rise and fall of deep visceral chanting and the vibration of dancing feet on bare red ground. The unrepresentable and theorising body knowledge, the space between body and representation, have remained an enduring interest in all of my research. As I wandered back and forth over a lifetime of presentations, the shapes of key influences emerged. Relations with Aboriginal people and country are incorporated into my ways of being in the world. Feminist theories and their libidinal flows have been fundamental in shaping both my life and my research. Doctoral students emerged as a powerful generative force, and the places where I have lived and worked, have been the crucial ground of my being and knowing. These influences culminate in the contemporary force of the Anthropocene, calling us to consider how the world is asking to be named and how we can learn to be human differently for the well-being of our planet. It was Aboriginal students who bridged the profound and incommensurable gap between living on a remote desert community and life back in a rural town. It was my best ever teaching experience. I learnt so much teaching in TAFE as a part-time casual and enrolling in a graduate diploma to find out how to do it. I conducted my first research project as part of the course, a positivist survey of Aboriginal learning styles. I got a high distinction, but knew nothing about their learning, which had exploded in a multiplicity of representational forms. They did beautiful drawings, took photos, wrote small stories, published a monthly newsletter. We talked and laughed incessantly and visited many Aboriginal sites, including Uluru and Katajuta. Two big questions emerged for me at this time. What is the relationship between traditional and contemporary Aboriginal connections to land? And how can I, as a second-generation Scottish migrant, belong? I didn't want to formulate another white research project, but local Anawan woman Patsy Cohen asked if I would help her research Inglebar and the 5 Black Matriarchs, the place where she was taken as a 5-year-old child. I had no idea what any of this meant, and this position of unknowing was an important starting point. Our main event was a day when Patsy invited everyone who had a past history with Inglebar to gather for a day of remembering and recording. It was a nightmare initiation for a new researcher. But we continued on to complete 2 years of collaborative research, documented in our book, built around 2 of Patsy's early memories: the courtroom scene of her removal, separated irreparably from her mother, brother and sister, and her return to Inglebar as a displaced, disoriented and traumatised teenager. We worked together on this as a project of healing. Since Inglebar, I have completed a large number of research projects in collaboration with Aboriginal people, their places and communities. This project, in partnership with archaeologists, was initiated by Tony Perkins, an extraordinary cultural broker. As coordinator of Yarrawarra Aboriginal Cultural Centre, he wanted to produce oral histories and archaeological material for their educational ecotourism. These 5 small books were co-produced by our team of academic and Aboriginal researchers, each constructed as art pieces from a double-page landscape image in the middle. A further project moved south to Murray Aboriginal Language and Cultural Cooperative to concentrate on language revival, on connecting language and story back to country. We published a book, Singing the Coast, but perhaps more significantly, Aboriginal children are now graduating from the HSC in Gumbaynggirr language, and Murray leads the Many Rivers Language Revival Program from Bundjalung country on the mid-north coast of New South Wales to Gadigal country in Sydney. So in summary, I can trace continuing threads throughout my academic work of a foundational interest in our relationship with place, the world, our planet. A commitment to different forms of knowledge and representation from a deep respect for oral traditions and knowledge held in different creative forms. An understanding of the productive disruption of certainty as a necessary condition of this work and the need to always venture beyond the limits of understanding to explore new possibilities. It is said that we supervise in the way we were supervised, and I was very lucky to enrol in a PhD at the rise of feminist post-structuralism with a profoundly permission-giving supervisor in Bronwyn Davies. My PhD was an opportunity to bring new feminist understandings into conversation with Aboriginal influences. This uneasy alliance, perhaps most powerfully expressed in my extreme dis-ease with the written word as the source of all knowledge. I became exhausted from reading abstract literature and was forced to search for another way. I recognised that the stories of Ingleby embodied a connection to place and representation that I was unable to do for myself. I started a process of bodywork massage with a fellow student who was writing a PhD called Tissue Talk, and began to explore ways of writing directly from the body, and Body Landscape Journals was born. A list of the titles I can remember being significant to my work at the time reveals something of the impetus of this era. This list is only a small sample of the burgeoning feminist literature of the 1990s, predicated on the work of previous feminist activists and writers like Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own and Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. The titles signify how the energy of this work was directed towards expressing more embodied ways of researching and writing, in the full recognition that all knowledge is partial and situated, and we can only speak from that place. All of these theorists evolved into a contemporary present, but the one I followed was Australian feminist philosopher Elizabeth Gross for her materialism. Her book Volatile Bodies generated an eruption of energy and excitement in its gesture of interrogating Western philosophy from the perspective of the female body. Chaos Territory Art takes up Deleuzean theory to offer art as the excess of natural selection, and includes a beautiful chapter on Kathleen Pechiara's Mountain Devil paintings, where she writes, "Each is becoming devil of paint itself, the coming alive of the patterns and corrugations of its skin, of its tracks, of the arcs of its movement, as well as the projection of skin onto the terrain, the belonging together of both the skin, the movement of the mountain devil over its country, and the earth and its secret locations, which sustains them all through its own excesses and their ingenuity." A piece of my writing from Water in a Dry Land probably best illustrates the ways feminist post-structuralism and Aboriginal collaborations have come together. It was written in response to the question of how can I learn country and what stories can we tell our children so that they too can come to know country. And in this, I have to say I'm blessed with Nerida's talk this morning and her wonderful metaphors, because they so helped to think through this really complex stuff that is so hard to think and to say. So I wrote, stealing time in that precious hour before dawn again, a thief in the night, I write a story about plums. Walking along the rail trail, find red seedling plums, small, mottled, red and yellow, skin and seeds scattered on the ground. We try some ripe ones because we forgot our lunch. Further along, another tree. This time the plums are deep maroon when ripe, so we eat some more. They taste slightly different. Still further, a bright yellow one, and then finally, larger, deep gold plums dripping from the tree, so ripe they drop into fingers as we reach into wet leafy branches to receive golden fruit, sweet and luscious. I put them in a bowl on the kitchen table to enjoy the bright colours, the reds, yellows, maroons and golds. Each day the miracle of plum colour unfolds. How is it, I wonder, that colour is produced and changes so day by day? What does it mean to eat colour? My growing interest in alternative methodologies led to international collaborations through AERA's Qualitative Research SIG and Manchester University's Summer Institute, both gathering places for leading-edge methodology discussions. In November last year, we ran the Summer Institute of the Antipodes with an international audience of presenters and participants in a daily schedule of thinking, talking, doing and making to extend the worldwide research networks and collaborations that have grown out of the trajectory of this research interests. So in summary, feminist post-structuralism evolved to an enduring interest in research methodologies, moving from qualitative to post-qualitative research, and a recent interest in new materialism, always with the productive disruption of certainty that seems to be an inevitable accompaniment to my embodied understanding of Aboriginal ways of being in and knowing the world. Doctoral students have taken me into worlds I would never have dreamed possible, such as deep underground coal mines, aged care homes, and remote desert places. They have equally led me into new modes of thinking and being. For years I have only supervised doctoral students in cohorts we have now come to call the Space, Place and Body Group, in a move Linda Knight described as making the shift from diverse individual and local research projects to the overall concepts that frame them. Recently joined by Karen Malone, we conducted our intensive residential school on the Great Southern Ocean in Victoria, where each student shared how their chosen chapter from the newly published Disrupting Data in Qualitative Inquiry represented their struggles, questions, and potential resolutions in their own approach to data. We linked our preliminary reading of a methodology paper by Stephanie Springay and Sarah Truman to walking methodologies on a beach walk the following day. Under Angela Foley's guidance, we became immersed in colour, form, movement and sound to create a haiku to share on our return to our warm living room space. We experiment with tanglements of weather, wind, sand, early spring blossom, and the move to writing in the very constrained form of the haiku. Opening ourselves to such collective experimentation can be understood in terms of Patty Lather's blueprint for post-qualitative research, which she explains as our critical project that is not about individual but very collective procedure, a very social enterprise where we start where we are. Blossom touches soft, child ghosts tracing memories, birds chirping, smells spring, rust-red iron rocks, fine bright pink and red seaweed, red-haired woman sits. While I lick my lips, water waves, tea trees warm, breathe, bee brushes my palm. Perhaps the most influential of all doctoral students, Uwalii researcher Chrissy Joy Marshall, struggled with academic language and thought until we worked out that to make any knowledge claims at all, she had to think through country, the specific country of the Narran Lake. She assembled a painting and translations from Uwalii and Erinjambori languages on a DVD to share her thesis with her non-Aboriginal colleagues. In this introductory painting, Chrissy Joy presented an overview with the creation story of the Narran Lake at its centre. Together we modified this methodology as thinking through country for our research project Bubbles on the Surface, a place pedagogy of the Narran Lake. Our project gathered up Gamaroi, Bakanji and Yorta Yorta artists as we moved with the waterways through the language countries of the vast Murray-Darling Basin. After 8 sequential research projects and 4 major exhibitions of artwork and stories, I wrote Water in a Dry Land. I had assumed that each artist would depict their own country, but when we visited the dry and barren lake after Chrissy Joy had become incapacitated with brain injuries, Bakanji artist Badger Bates created this lino print to sing the lake and Chrissy Joy's well-being. It was not until writing Water in a Dry Land that I revisited the depth of my entanglement with Chrissy Joy. There in that dark and airless room I sit with this woman whom I have so grown to love and think about her story of unimaginable pain and suffering. The grandmother who witnessed the killing of her people and experienced atrocities too terrible to speak of. The mother who fled from her home in case her baby was taken away and died in childbirth. The daughter who's taken on so much trauma of others, who holds their pain in white crescent-shaped, moon-shaped scars in her brain. In Judith Butler's words, I wrote, "For if I am confronted by you, then you are already of me, and I am nowhere without you. I cannot muster the we except by finding the way in which I am tied to you, by trying to translate, but finding that my own language must break up if I am to yield to know you. You are what I gain through this disorientation and loss. This is how the human comes into being again and again as that which we have yet to know." In summary, I have supervised many students who want to experiment with different forms of doctoral research and writing. One of the most provocative of questions I ask is, where are you in all of this? In response, they enter the deeper challenge of generating new knowledge, which necessarily requires new subjectivities to emerge through a process of waiting in the chaotic space of unknowing. This is always ameliorated by the group who come to know and support each other in the long process of doctoral research. Through this, we come to understand the entanglements of knowledge production with each other and with our different worlds. When I moved from regional Australia to Monash University's Gippsland campus in Latrobe Valley, Victoria, I started to theorise place in its global context. It was the images of the power stations as the cause of climate change flashed every night on the television news that started me thinking about pathologised communities, how the communities of Latrobe Valley enabled the clean and cultured city of Melbourne, which was invisibly connected to these power stations every time someone turned on the electricity. The response to the challenges of climate change was largely framed in terms of the techno-scientific solutions of modernity. But I wondered what might be an adequate educational response. How might we educate a generation of children and adults who inhabit a global cyber world to be attached to their local places, to inhabit and to know place differently? Based on my work with place spanning what was now already 20 years, I presented About Place as a conceptual framework in AARE in 2007, proposing that place bridges academic disciplines, the real and representational, the local and global, and Indigenous and Western epistemologies, and that this can be enacted educationally in pedagogies of place. I reconceptualised David Grunwald's critical place pedagogies from a feminist post-structural and Indigenous perspective as involving three core elements. Our relationship to place is constituted in stories and other representations. Place learning is embodied and local, and deep place learning occurs in a contact zone of contestation. In the shadows of the power stations, my colleague Monica Green and I researched pedagogies of place in the integration of children's activities in a local wetland across all subject levels and grade levels and subject areas at a local primary school. Again, it was the intimate and immense. Power lines, climate change, and Gemma's moment of exquisite attention to a frog hidden under a log amidst a flurry of ants. Multiple and diverse place methods have evolved in different geographies and communities. In the urban agglomeration of Western Sydney, colleague Jackie Duarte and I embarked on a project to better understand how to connect children's out-of-school knowing with in-school pedagogies in complex multicultural classrooms. Children created extraordinary maps of their everyday language practices, revealing worlds often inexpressible in words and unknown to their teachers. At Erewhon Public School, I interviewed a small Aboriginal boy about his language map. He tells me he speaks Aboriginal with his cousins at school English, at home English, at pools English. He says his mum is English and his dad is Aboriginal. And he is 3 countries. He comes alive when he talks about the colours of his map, the colours of his life. That's my mum's favourite colours. That's the Rabbitohs. Mummy likes all the purple, the pinks, and me and Daddy like the brown and all the other boy colours. That's my baby brother's. He likes blue because he goes for the Bulldogs. He names the music he used to download on his iPad before he smashed it. Eminem, Biggie Small, They Never Loved Truth Like This, Old Town, Funk You Up, I Caved In Like a Wrecking Ball. I had to look it all up because I'd never heard of any of it. And I was appalled. His language map functions as a threshold, bringing a cultural life richly lived outside of school into the classroom. During the project, Achilles transformed from a diagnosed child accompanied by an integration aide, a non-reader and non-writer, always suspended, to an enthusiastic learner embracing his contemporary urban Aboriginal culture. In summary, place as the crucial ground of being and knowing has offered an overarching conceptual framework that functions as a bridge across different disciplines and ways of being and knowing the world. In doing this, it has generated new pedagogical possibilities and diverse creative methods that continue to evolve in the different materialities, spatialities, demographies and locations of my work. And the final section, and this is shorter. The Anthropocene had grown into a worldwide movement of post-human research scholarships since it was first popularised in the year 2000 by Crutzen and Sturmer as a new geological age to replace the Holocene. It is the not yet of time to be signalled by humanity's increasing impact on the fate of the planet in the geological record, and perhaps by the end of the human species itself. This painting by Darug artist Leanne Tobin from our recent joint performance perhaps best represents the challenge of thinking through the complexity of intertwined, colonial and post-colonial nature cultures in this land we call Australia today. It is the unfinished business of our future. Western Sydney is many places. In searching for a home in the move from rural Victoria, I faced my continuing question of the forever migrant, of where and how to belong. I chose a place on the furthest extent of the Cumberland Plain, where the ridge of the lower Blue Mountains meets the Nepean River. The river became a life force, generating its own intimacies and intensities. Through everyday walking, which grew over time into two parallel projects about the Anthropocene, the age of human entanglement in the fate of our planet. The first began as a tiny project in which I invited two young children to engage in an experiment about Karen Barad's concept of interaction. And they agreed to choose a place to play and allow me to record their chosen activities. They frequently chose the nearby river, their play documented in tiny videos such as this, where child, tin and water can be explored as co-emergent entities without any prior independent existence. In transcribing another video of their river play, which I can't show you because they both had their clothes off, I began to envisage language as emerging simultaneously with the world, as child actions and vocalisations, bird calls and river gurgling came into being, and our project about emergent literacy in sustainability-rich sites was conceived. Our project Naming the World about emergent languages in sustainability learning was funded by the ARC in 2015. The wonderful team of Annette Woods, Iris Dunn and Paulina Rautio has evolved into an exciting collective collaborating with early learning sites in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, Finland, England and Scotland. At the end of 12 months of deep hanging out, based on Haraway's interpretation of Desprez's curious practice, co-researcher Sarah Powell and I have come up with these 7 independent categories through which we believe sustainability and literacy come together in the worlding of young children. The qualities of sustained engagement, vitality, intensity and libido, which we believe are crucial markers of the literacy plus sustainability nexus, are evident in this short video of animal-human becomings, the most common of all of the categories.
Hunter, you need to stop and wait, please.
If he comes out, and if you want to come to me, I'll try to get him onto me.
Will you just?
Can you see that?
Tegan, can I have the iPad?
Look, come with it!
Ladies, can I have an iPad, please?
It's right there.
Jordan.
It's brown! It's not down, it's live! Where's the big elephant? Where is it? Where is it?
Just there.
Oh, yeah! He's quick.
Way to run for it.
Jordan.
Did you see it, Jordan?
Do
you? This is way too quick for me. Hunter? Hey guys, listen, do you think he might have been a little bit scared and that's why he ran?
I've absolutely fallen in love with working with 0 to 5-year-old children, and the younger the better. So the river, with all of its intensities and intimacies, has become its own project, a long, slow walking project exploring how, within the myriad life forms of the river commons, we can learn to be human differently for the age of the Anthropocene. Of all the possible questions to ask about how to be human differently in the contested space of the river commons, the one that most commonly comes to mind in my walks by the river is the one Afrika Taylor describes as the most pressing need of our time. How can we learn to live well together and with the more than human world? And here, with this short video, I hand over the final thought to the river itself. Thank you. Thank you. So do you want to do questions?
Yeah, we'd like to open up for questions.
Yep.
Do we have some questions? Can we open for questions?
Questions, comments? It's really hard to say why, but I guess what I like in research are challenges that make us think differently and undermine all of our certainties about anything we know. And there's something really extraordinary about the 0 to 2s in particular. And when I started working with them, I really had no idea how to make sense of it, and I was actually quite distressed by the fact that 0 to 2s were in care. But as I got to know them over time, I got to know them as a little mob that are learning to be collective, that are learning to be together, that do things together. And they do fantastic things together, and they communicate with each other in all sorts of interesting ways. So I was watching a couple when they were having their morning tea, and there were some paintings hanging above the little table. And one of them pointed at the paintings and goes, and then the other one responds. That sort of challenges what we think about language. What is language? And I talked to the woman who looks after them, and she said, yeah, they know what they're talking about. We don't know. And she said, sometimes I have a long conversation while I'm changing their nappies that just goes on the whole time. And then I heard a kind of program on Radio National about how babies in utero can hear. And what they hear is not distinguishable as words, but it is actually just sound. So I started to think about how they communicate in music. Because when you listen to what they're saying to each other, it's the pitch, the rhythm that is making meaning. So for me, that sort of insight about where language comes from, what we know about the world, is just so precious.
Great question and great answer. We probably have time for another one or two questions.
My own children? Yeah, okay. That's an interesting one because a lot of my female PhD students have said it's really important that I've got 4 children. And then I talked to them about what it was like having 4 children, because I shared a study with my oldest daughter. When I was doing my PhD, she was doing her HSC. I don't say a lot about my children because I like to keep my family life private. But one of the things that I did in Oulu recently, and I said that the nature of this presentation came out of my time in Oulu, because a female student who had 3 young children, all very close to each other, wanted to know how I did it with young kids. And I said, well, and she called it, in their sort of awkward way of Finnish English, she called it Tales from Margaret. I said, oh my God. So over dinner we told stories of our lives, and one of the stories I told about my children that she thought was really funny was that when I was a self-sufficient farmer, I was making money by spinning wool, and that's very slow and very long work, and I used to work till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. So I would dress all the kids in their school clothes and put them to bed so that when I got up in the morning, I could just get them all out of bed and put them on the bus. So they loved that story, and but by the end of the night, over wine and dinner, I had told all my tales, and then I had to think, well, what am I going to do in the next session the following day that they called Tales from Margaret? And that was when I looked at all my presentations, and there's hundreds of them that never ever managed to be papers like you're supposed to do. And I tried to make sense of them, and I didn't really succeed on that occasion. But I thought, when I do this lecture, I'm going to really seriously look at my presentations, because a lot of my work is in images. So then that was how that went. But yeah, I still have a child living at home. I have 6 grandchildren. Being a mother, being a parent is the hardest thing I've ever done, and continues to be. So much harder than doing a PhD or even doing the Radford lecture.
I was just going to wrap it up. Is that
Okay. Go on.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Big questions of our time. Deep respect, spaces in between, Nerida. What a way, a beautiful language. What a way to start, Nerida. What a way to end. What a day. And to use Nerida's words, what a bundle of possibilities. Thank you, everyone. I don't know what else to say about the day, but thank you.